Stand by. Is this thing on?
Yes, Dan.
Oh, hello.
You're listening to Old News with Dan and Carrie.
This just in.
Breaking news to report.
We are live.
Old newscasters
Can we just say former?
Sure. Former newscasters reunite behind the mic after more than 20 years.
Old news is good news.
Stay tuned. I am thrilled and honored to introduce today's guest. Emeritus Professor James Hoyt is a legendary professor and former director of the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Journalism and Mass Communication. He has taught thousands of journalism students, including me. Professor Hoyt's resume is extensive and long. A few highlights include consulting for NBC News, serving on the Wisconsin Supreme Court's Committee on Cameras in the Courtroom in the late 70s, and being chairman of the UW Athletic Board and faculty rep to the NCAA and Big Ten Conference. Professor Hoyt was inducted into the Wisconsin Broadcasting Hall of Fame in 2007 and the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Wisconsin Silver Circle in 2017. Professor Hoyt has devoted his career and life to journalism, athletics, and music. And we are excited to talk about all of these topics and more with the one, the only Professor James Hoyt. Welcome to Old News.
Well, that's quite a comprehensive introduction. I hope I can live up to everything you have promoted there. Thank you very much.
And I had to cut out so many things. You've done so very much. And you have an incredible career as a student and on the faculty at the journalism school. What got you into journalism in the first place?
You know, it's a kind of a long story, but I'll go back and start. Even in high school, I graduated in 1961. Among my various activities involving acting and music and so on, I was on the debate team. I remember distinctly in January of 1961, our debate coach brought in a little 12-inch black and white television set that he set on a filing cabinet in his office, and we watched John F. Kennedy's inaugural address.
Wow. So
we sat there and just kind of captivated. It was such a significant moment in American history, like the young people are moving in. And I was very encouraged by that. I was interested in politics. I've always been interested in writing and in journalism, and I didn't know which direction I would go. I was admitted both to University of Wisconsin-Madison and to George Washington University. If I had gone to George Washington, I probably would have gone into political area, came to Madison, started to major in political science, but became more interested in journalism and in writing, figuring, okay, I'm not really cut out to be a politician, but maybe I can cover politicians. And my early on mentor and advisor was a faculty member in what was then the speech department, Lee Dreyfus. Lee Dreyfus eventually became governor of Wisconsin, but at the time he was general manager of WHA-TV, the public station in Madison. And he kind of took me under his wing and helped me find courses, a mixture of broadcasting and journalism, steered me to a number of part-time jobs at WHA TV, and then steered me to an internship position at WTMJ in Milwaukee. And that kind of steered me into the broadcast area. I was very interested in broadcast news, but my family were all educators. My parents, my sister, everyone in my family were educators, and I kind of felt I was going to become an educator at some point. And because I was picking up a fair amount of journalism experience along the way, Professor Dreyfus encouraged me to go on into a graduate program, and I ended up getting a master's degree and went away and came back and got a PhD. And then I took off an academic career that also combined professional journalism also. I taught at Indiana University for 3 years. I worked at a number of local television stations and then eventually at NBC News in Washington, and then came back to the faculty in 1973 as head of the broadcast news program at that point. And I have to say, for somebody who grew up in Wisconsin, to have my career at the state university, at the flagship university, and to be able to contribute to and to be a part of this wonderful institution is just beyond the good life. And to work with students, to work with bright students like yourself, and others who motivate me, and I love to continue to keep in touch with them in my retirement. It keeps me young, and it makes me feel that this discipline within the state of Wisconsin continues to be in good ground.
You had an incredible relationship with so many students, and we have some messages from some of the former podcast guests who were your students who wanted to say hello.
Hey, Professor Hoyt, Andy Kendi here, all the way from Omaha, Nebraska, class of 91. And if you recall, Wisconsin won 7 football games during my 4 undergraduate years. That's combined 7 wins in 4 years. Anyways, I'm now covering the other big red in the state of Nebraska. And I just want to say thanks for all the lessons that you've given, not just me, but thousands of aspiring journalists at UW, and for teaching us the right way of doing things, the ethical way. And not just that, but showing everyone the importance of athletics and what it can mean to a university and a community. I think that's really, really important. And just thank you, and greetings and the best from Omaha, Nebraska.
Hey, Professor Hoyt, it is Shannon Pat Sipe. I know you've asked me to call you Jim over the years, which I just absolutely cannot do because you're always going to be Professor Hoyt to me, my favorite professor of all time. Even though my first writing assignment, you gave me a C, which turns out actually was the right call because that was actually a pretty terrible assignment. Coming as an English major, it was a very different kind of writing, and so you really snapped me into gear into writing for broadcast. In addition to, helping teach me about the industry and connecting me to help get my first job as a weekend producer, you really were the first person I felt like was my new family after I moved from California to Wisconsin. I remember going to the Nitty Gritty with you and Kelly, and Kelly also my best friend and business partner. We were in grad school together, and we would just cry and talk about our boyfriends and how terrible it was over cheese curds at the Nitty Gritty, and that was rough. And I can't believe you just listened to that. It must have been fairly entertaining for you. But between that and coming to the wedding, Roger and I, when we got married, and you and Cheryl holding baby Isaac, who's now 20, if you can believe that. You've just really been there for us. So I'm so excited you're doing this interview, and I hope to see you sometime soon.
Hello, Jim, Carrie, and Dan. Thank you for the invitation to speak about Professor James Hoyt, a man who has had tremendous influence on my life and career. Earlier this summer, I had the pleasure of having lunch with Jim, as I do whenever I make it back to Wisconsin. And we had lots of old yarns to share, and it was a wonderful time. And it was just before his birthday. And on his birthday, I was thinking about him and decided to write what an important role he played in my life on my Facebook page. And since nothing's changed about the way I feel about him since last summer, I thought I would just share this birthday greeting to Jim that I put on Facebook. I'm sure many of us have had someone who has had a profound effect on our lives, personal development, and careers. It may have been a family member, friend, or educator. In my case, it was the latter. Professor James Hoyt was my inspiration, mentor, and most importantly, good friend. Today is Jim's birthday, and I recently got together with him and shared many a story from both of our careers. Professor Emeritus Hoyt is a former director of the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, my alma mater. As I learned and appreciated much later in life, he had a huge impact on my early journalism and media career that I didn't fully realize and appreciate until decades later. I am so fortunate to have had him in my life. I'm sure we can all use a Jim Hoyt in our lives. Have a perfect birthday, Jim, and thank you. And I can't wait to listen and watch this podcast. Slancha.
Hi, Jim. Katie Culver here. I'm sitting in 5112 Vilas Hall, the office that you occupied when I first started in the J School. I am so delighted that I received this invitation to record a message for you because you have been such an important influence in not just my professional life, but my personal life as well. We first met when I took J201 back in, 1986. It's a long, long time ago. And over the years, you have been a really important professional mentor, but also a really, really good friend. I'm in my second year as director, working on a whole bunch of leadership capabilities. And I've been reading this book by a J School grad, David Grossman, who you may actually remember. And it's called Heart First. And it's about leadership is about the head. It's about all of my fabulous spreadsheets and plans and communication, but it's also about heart. And I was thinking of you last week when I was reading a section, a passage from a leader who said that people will not remember what I did, but they remember how I made them feel. And I immediately thought of you because you always made me feel, when I had like the deepest doubts about my capabilities, you always made me feel like I could do it. You made me feel like you cared. And that's really, really been important to me. We went through some loss together, you and I will always cherish our Friday morning breakfasts where we worked through our feelings together. And again, you just showed how much you cared, even though you were going through a struggle at the same time. So, Jim, it's been an honor to work with you professionally, but it's also been a great joy to know you personally. I really hope you know how you make people feel. So thanks so much, Jim. And on Wisconsin.
I like the old school news sound.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I didn't see that part of the program, of the podcast coming, but wow.
Good. We wanted to surprise you.
Yeah.
Well, but they all speak to how profoundly you have impacted their lives. As a professor, did you try to do that, or was that just a beautiful byproduct of your personality?
I just tried to be helpful. I guess I am. So many people have told me, I believe it now, that I am a caring person. And that Katie used the term, and it comes up so often, that not only did I look on them as students, I looked on them as individuals, that I really wanted to help them in their lives and in their careers. It's one of the reasons that I enjoy keeping in touch with so many of them. I probably have 120 Facebook friends who are former students who somehow find me along the way. And I just thoroughly enjoy following them, helping them, guide them, answering their questions. I can remember when I started on the faculty, I taught the introductory course, Journalism 201, which I taught virtually every semester I was there for 30 years. And when I began teaching it, it was kind of the class that nobody else wanted to teach. So they would punish the new faculty member to teach 201. And I taught it for a semester, and I can remember some of my colleagues come and say, well, what do you think about it? And I said, you know what? I actually enjoyed it. He said,
What
okay,
was
you can do
what
it again
was
next
201?
semester.
Yeah, you got
next semester and next semester. And what I discovered was I was involved in energizing them and exciting them about the field. And many of those students, even though it was a class of maybe 300 or 400 or 500 students who would come into my office and try to find out more about the field, it gave me an opportunity to encourage the best of the students to continue with the field and to keep in touch with them, and then to be on the lookout for opportunities, for internship opportunities, for part-time opportunities, to engage them in some of the research that I was doing for networks and for television stations, and to help steer their careers and make contacts for them along the way. And that was just so rewarding to me to see them take off. So many of them give me credit, which I don't think I deserve all of it, but I help to steer them, get them started, get them going in the path, but then they take off on their own. They have to find their own direction at that point. But that's been the motivating factor in my career as an educator.
Wow. Well, first of all, I want to say I've never met you in person, and it's an honor to be on this podcast with you, just like Carrie said at the beginning. So I'm glad I get to sit here and be a fly on the wall right now. And I'm always a little jealous when Carrie talks about University of Wisconsin and the journalism program there, because I went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, but I think I've worked with some people and had, I've worked with a lot of people who went through your program, and I've also had the pleasure of being taught by some of the people that you ended up having in your department over there, Pat Hastings, Lou Friedland, and they had a huge impact on my life because, Pat is the person who mentored so many of us at UW-Milwaukee at the time into the field. So I know that the tentacles go far and deep. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to also, Katie mentioned my wife's a teacher, so I hear this a lot. It's not what you teach people all the time, it's how you make them feel. And I think for so many of us at that point in our lives, when we're trying to decide what we're going to do with our lives, where we're going to go, what we want to be, we had people like you and Pat Hastings who would lift our foot up and put us on that first rung of the ladder and give us a little push and get us to go. And we will never forget that. So thank you for that.
And from our side of it, Dan, you never know how far it's going to lead. You don't know where it's going to go. And that kind of an effect and that kind of a relationship can continue on, as you're saying, through many generations. And then I go to another generation and another generation. So you never know. To me, that's part of the excitement of it too. You don't know how far the influence of an educator will lead.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk, you mentioned you were I'm going to go right into your career now because I'm excited about hearing more about it because you had such an exciting career, but you were in Washington, D.C. at the NBC Bureau. You were running it, right? Until like 19, no?
I wasn't running it, but there was one day that was kind of a highlight day for me. And that was the day of the Watergate break-in.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Yeah.
I was not, I was just a low producer, associate editor who just happened to draw the short straw and be in on this Saturday morning.
Wow.
Nobody else was there. I was there all alone on a Saturday morning, new guy there, still learning my way around. And I got a phone call from the local Channel 4 WRC crew down at local DC court, saying, we got this thing going on down here. There's these guys that got arrested in the Democratic National Committee headquarters overnight, and there's some phone numbers from the Republican National Committee, and we really don't know what kind of a story it is. What do you think we should do about it? I mean, I'm the new guy. What am I supposed to do about it?
What did you say?
Yeah, what did you say?
I said, what else do you say? I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Right. Give me a minute.
Fortunately, one of our correspondents happened to be in the bureau that morning. Carl Stern was his name. Carl Stern had been on the White House beat previously, and I went down and consulted with Carl, and he came up and said, here, let's work on it. He said, I'll call John Mitchell. He was the chairman of Nixon's reelection campaign. He said, he's in San Clemente. Now I'll see what I can find out. So he called John Mitchell at in San Clemente, and about 5 minutes later, Carl came out of his office and said, I talked to Mitchell. He said, don't worry, there's nothing to it.
As you would expect.
Yeah, exactly. And so he and I chuckle. To this day, we still kind of chuckle about how we kind of weren't prepared to go on the story immediately. Of course, before the day was over, it was starting to explode. But that was, I wasn't running the bureau. I was a low man on the totem pole there, but I just happened to be the person who was all alone in the bureau in the early morning hours on that Saturday. So it was coincidence.
That's incredible. So how long did you work for NBC News?
I was there for about a year. Yeah, from that in 72, 73, I came here to Madison. They offered me an opportunity. They offered me an opportunity to stay on. They said, we'd like to have you stay as long as you would like to. And when I got this offer from Wisconsin to kind of combine journalism and education, I told them it would be hard for me to turn it down. And I always remember the bureau chief, Frank Jordan was his name. He eventually became the dean at American University. But Frank said, there's always a job for you here. If you want to go take that job, if that's what you feel you want to do, feel free to go do that. And if you ever want to get some more, have some more opportunities working at NBC, feel free. And actually, he was a part of the link that got me numerous opportunities to get involved in a variety of research projects, working for NBC News over the years while I was a faculty member here at Wisconsin.
Oh, interesting. So what were some of the research projects you did?
We had a number of them. The three in particular that stand out at NBC. They'd be working with the News Research Office out of New York. But first they had one involving their owned and operated stations, where you were looking at the news. I was doing analyses of the local newscasts, and I think at that time they had 5 owned and operated stations: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Cleveland, and Washington, Chicago and Washington, D.C., and do a detailed analysis of their newscasts compared to their competitors' newscasts, because they weren't doing particularly well in the ratings against their competitors, and they wanted to come up with some modifications to help them do better. I wasn't involved in actual implementation, but I was providing data for them to on that regard. And then I actually did a similar one a year or two later regarding the Today Show. Again, this was after Good Morning America kind of burst on the scenes and catapulted being a distant third place to all of a sudden being a first place, and left the Today Show, which had dominated the early market for many years, kind of left them behind, and they needed to get a good grasp on what was happening. Why was Good Morning America having the success they were? So I did kind of a similar type of thing, almost a minute-by-minute comparison of a week's worth of NBC Today shows and ABC's Good Morning America programs to see how they were formatting it, how they were pacing it, what kinds of guests they were having, what kind of interviews, what was the focus of the program, and so on. So that was input for them. Again, I was not involved in making the decisions based on it, but I was providing the data for them to make the.
Do you remember?
Yeah, what did
do you remember what those
discover
general findings were? Yeah.
Oh yeah, well NBC was kind of holding to an old school, just the news and nothing but the news, sort of, which was kind of not a particularly exciting format. It was good, it was solid, but it was journalism-based, whereas Good Morning America broadened the license considerably and added a lot more entertainment news, a lot more people who were outside of the traditional political arena and so on, and made it a much more broad-based, much more exciting, a lot of graphics and much faster paced news. And they were very reluctant to move in that direction. They were kind of proud of being traditional. But when the ratings showed that there was a disadvantage to that, they began to grudgingly start to move in that direction.
It looked more like what we're used to seeing today than what people saw back in the 70s and
exactly.
Before that. Yeah. So you said this before, but I think I lost my audio when you said this. You grew up in Wisconsin in what town?
My hometown was Wausau.
Oh, you were from Wausau.
I grew up in Wausau, and in high school and college, I worked my summers part-time at there was only one local TV station, Channel 7, WSAU. I worked there nights and weekends, and I worked at a local television repair shop, daytimes, also owned by the same corporation. So I kind of got a baptism in broadcasting from those two perspectives, and I kind of came away thinking, this is really kind of an exciting field. This is something that I'd like to be a participant in.
And weren't you also installing antennas on people's roofs?
As a part of that weekday daytime job at what was called Forward Electronics, we did a lot of installations. We put antennas on roofs. We put, what else? We installed sound systems in schools and churches. But the antennas on the rooftop is kind of a fun story, because there was just the one station in Wausau. And people, if they wanted to get more than one, they had to have a fairly significant rooftop or tower antenna outside their home. And if they wanted to get Milwaukee or Green Bay or Minneapolis television stations, you had to have a fairly significant piece of hardware outside the home. So we would install those. And so I was a crew guy helping to install these antennas. And I can remember households that could not get anything other than one television station. They bought a TV set, but when we would install the TV set and then hook it up and then go in and turn it on, and they could see all these other TV stations, I can just remember this enthusiasm, this excitement. Oh my gosh, look at, we can see a Milwaukee station there. We can see this from Minneapolis, and they were just blown away by that. And that was exciting to me also about broadcasting, thinking, look at what's the future. Where rather than having only one station, you might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or what do we have now? Thousands.
Right. Now, infinity.
Like we do now, yeah. You're bringing back memories when I used to go up to Rhinelander to visit my grandparents when I was a kid. They had channel 12 by then, but that was the only channel we could get was channel 12. And it was exciting to go to Rhinelander and see my grandparents, not just because it was my grandparents, but we got to watch Johnny Carson because he was on NBC at the time. So that was the show we got to watch. So yeah, those memories just from those simple things like getting a station you don't get to watch at home or something like that.
And Channel 7 in Wausau at that time, it was mainly a CBS affiliate.
Yeah.
But also because there were not other stations in the market, they could pick off programs from NBC or ABC also. So their nighttime schedule, although it would be predominantly CBS, would have a few programs from the other networks also. It was like a program manager's dream to be able to pick the best programs from each of the networks. At some point, they weren't able to do that anymore, but it was always kind of fun. We would sit in the control room and watch because there was only one AT&T long line that brought the signals into Wausau. And somebody at some AT&T control point had to switch from CBS to NBC during the 30-second station break, and we'd kind of watch the monitor to see if there was a little video click that indicated that yes, they had made the change to the networks, because we did not have independent feeds from each of the networks.
That's incredible. No bathroom breaks during that 30 seconds. You got to switch the feed. Well, even when I was on morning news with Dan in Madison, my parents still, and this was late 1990s, they had an antenna, and they would usually have it shooting at Milwaukee or Chicago because they were in Lake Geneva. But they realized if they turned the dial and the antenna was swung around and pointed to Madison, they could watch us. So that was the only time of day it pointed to Madison, but it was nice to have them watching.
The days of the antenna rotor, there was a rotor on top of it. Move it around for the market you wanted to pick up.
Yep.
And winter was terrible because it would freeze, and my dad would sit at the TV and turn it and tell me to go outside. Is it moving? Is it moving?
Oh, the fun days, Dan.
Yeah. So what other local TV stations so you worked at WSAU, and then where did you go after that?
That way it was really WSA in Wisconsin, and then WHA in Madison, and WTMJ in Milwaukee. When I was doing consulting later on in my career, I had a variety of local television stations: Illinois, Iowa, Texas, West Virginia. I forget where they all were, but they were. I wasn't working at them. I was doing research for them, for the news directors or for the general managers of the stations.
Oh, so were you researching kind of like you were talking about earlier, how to grow a time slot or how to increase viewers, things like that?
Exactly. This was audience research where I would hire college students who lived in that market. If it was Odessa, Texas, I would hire college students from Texas who would then go home for the weekends, and they would make phone calls and do these interviews with people who lived there to get their assessment of the local TV stations. And then I would put together a report for the general manager based on how people were responding to the newscasts that they were watching in their market, why they were watching what they were, and why they were avoiding the ones that they were avoiding. And I did the same thing in Iowa. I had a station in Sioux City. I had one in Peoria, Illinois. I had one in Wheeling, West Virginia. In all those cases, I would hire college students in a nearby campus to be a part of the study research.
So was that kind of a precursor of Nielsen or an organization like that?
We weren't doing it. Would probably be, no, it wasn't doing ratings. It was kind of trying to find out why the ratings were what they were.
Okay.
It was doing what Frank Magid did. Frank Magid was
Got
much
it.
more, he was more well known. He was also a professor. He was a sociology professor at the University of Iowa, who then turned turned the corner and became a full-time consultant. But I was doing similar things to what he was doing. Some of my clients told me I did it better than he did, but I can't. Magid was the gold standard of doing that.
Yeah,
Right.
we had experience.
Carrie and I are aware of Magid. We were consulted.
Yes, definitely. So going back to UW, you were a student for a long time because you went all the way through the PhD program. You ended up teaching there. I wanted to loop back to one thing about 201. What was 201? What was the class that nobody wanted that you ended up having that you ended up loving?
Well, I created a new class, really. I didn't
Oh,
pay a lot of attention to what had been done before, but my focus was on helping people understand the mass media and giving them background information, why they are the way they are. Why are newspapers organized the way they are? Why is broadcasting organized the way it is? What's the structure? Where does the money come from? What kind of a staff is involved in doing the programming and so on? And through newspapers, broadcast, motion picture industry, and virtually all of the mass media. And then, so I got a background understanding, and I always liked doing it that way because you could look out at the students and just see light bulbs going on in their heads. And they'd say, oh, that's why that is like that. That's why they have those commercial breaks. That's why they do this. And I loved being able to provide background and information on things that they were familiar with, but didn't really know the background for. Then I would spend about the last month of the semester talking about current issues, current controversies, current issues that they might read about or know something about. But I would always say going into the class, I can't tell you now what those issues are going to be because that's for 3 months away.
right.
And what the issues are today might be different than 3 months from now. And that was always an exciting part of it also. So that was I changed it into a background information about the media. So you understand it. And now if you want to make a career decision based on that, you're all the better informed as a result of it. One thing I was always careful about when freshmen would come into my office for advising, and they would say, I would ask them what they wanted to do, and they would know right away what they wanted to do. I want to be a writer for the Wall Street Journal. I want to be a sports reporter for ABC or whatever. I would always say, stop, don't tell me that now. You need to take some courses. You need to get a broad-based education. We're a part of the College of Letters and Science. You take a couple years worth of courses in journalism and other fields, and then let's come back and have that conversation. Let's see how you're feeling, how your interests have evolved during that time, because if the university is doing what it should be doing, you're going to have broadened horizons by that time. And if you come back and tell me the same thing at 2 years from now, I'll feel better about it because you'll have a more informed decision you've made. If you decide you want to go into chemical engineering, fine, that's what we're supposed to do, is help you find your interest, your passion, and your things you would like to do.
Now you wrote 2 books while you were a professor at the UW, right? Mass Media in Perspective and Writing News for Broadcast. Can you talk to us about those books, and did you use those books in your courses?
Well, Mass Media in Perspective was one that I wrote for a Journalism 201 type class. I don't think it didn't come out until I was just about done teaching the class, I think. So I only used it a couple of semesters, but Writing News for Broadcast, for many years was the kind of Bible of broadcast news writing, I keep being told. And the value in that, I have to give more credit than I could even give on this podcast to my co-author, Ed Bliss. It's Bliss and Hoyt, Writing News for Broadcast. Ed Bliss is a legend. He was Walter Cronkite's writer and producer at CBS.
Wow.
And before Walter Cronkite, he was Edward R. Murrow's chief writer and producer. So he was with Edward R. Murrow until Murrow left to go to the United States Information Agency, and then he moved to Cronkite. So he was Cronkite's writer and producer. And so he had a level of credentials way beyond mine. he dealt mainly with network level reporting, and I dealt more with local. It merged together very well. He was a wonderful man. We got along so well. And I can remember the poor editor at Columbia University Press trying to correct him. And Ed didn't like being corrected because he was an ultimate grammarian, and he knew the English language probably in truth better than any editor at a college press did. And he would argue with her. He would say, "No, I wrote it that way because that's the way it's supposed to be." I felt bad for the editor, but Ed was just a wonderful, wonderful person. And when our book came out, and we got a review from Walter Cronkite of the text, and Cronkite wrote, he said, "Bliss and Hoyt is the Strunk White of broadcast writing."
Oh,
I had a Strunk White book in my collection. I still might,
And we
actually.
thought, now that's a pretty high,
High praise.
And
I'm pretty sure we used your book at UWM.
Oh.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
A few years ago, my wife Cindy and I were in Washington, D.C. with the museum. I think the museum is not around on the mall anymore, but there's a large bookstore in there. We were looking around, and she came across this section, and she was looking, and she said, "Look, here's your book. It's got Bliss and Hoyt right in each." Yeah, so this point I said, that's 15 years old. I can't believe they're still using it, because there's been many other books that have come out. So I took a copy and I went to the bookstore manager, and I said, "I'm the co-author of this book here." And I said, "I'm surprised that it's still on your shelves after all of these years." And he kind of looked at me and he said, "Well, it is a classic, you know."
It's timeless, a timeless classic.
Yeah. And I thought, well, I know in my own mind it is, but I didn't know that.
Well, that's great to hear.
So to me, that was a
So I want to ask you before we move on from that, did you ever get a chance to talk to Mr. Bliss about Edward R. Murrow, and did he have any good stories about Murrow? Because that's like one of my heroes.
Yeah, I would. The one that I can remember, he was again a writer for him, and Murrow was doing the person-to-person program.
Dean Martin has been described as a golfer, one who occasionally leaves the course to make a recording, appear in a nightclub, clown on television, or make a movie.
One story that I can remember Ed told a couple times, that he would be dispatched to go bring the guest in. And one of the guests that he got a cab, I guess, and went over to get Robert Frost. So he was going in New York, he went to Robert Frost's home, and he knocked on the door and he said, "I'm Ed Bliss, I'm from Edward R. Murrow to bring you over for the program." And Robert Frost invited him in. He said, "Here, would you like to have a bourbon?" And they sat
Yes,
down,
I would.
and he said during the time, Robert Frost kept interviewing him, asking Bliss, "Tell me about yourself. What's your background? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's your goal?" And he said, "Here, I'm there to interview him and to bring him over to Edward R. Murrow." And he ended up interviewing me. He was so interested in me. And he said that was just a person who was interested in other people and cared about other people. And he just couldn't get that out of his mind. So that was his favorite story he liked to tell about working for Edward R. Murrow. He said he didn't have to do as much work for Murrow, or I'm sorry, he'd had to do a little more work for Murrow in terms of writing. But then for Cronkite was very much a good writer on his own. He did more editing. And Cronkite, I don't know if you ever see, they sometimes show these vintage videos of Walter Cronkite at his desk during the space shot videos or during the Kennedy assassination. And if you look at them, almost every one of these shots, sitting right behind Walter Cronkite, just over his right shoulder, is a bald man, and that's Ed Bliss.
Wow.
And Ed is always right there, right over his shoulder. He was passing materials back and forth to him the entire time. So they had a very close working relationship.
Wow. Part of broadcasting history. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Every time one of those pops up somewhere on Facebook, I'll forward it and then make a comment about it. I always enjoy seeing my co-author, friend Ed Bliss, sitting next to Walter Cronkite.
You taught many classes, many students. I heard Bob Miller, who, for our viewers, he gave one of the hello messages to Professor Hoyt earlier, and we've interviewed him on the show. I believe it was Bob in a different piece about you who said you had taught over 16,000 students. Does that sound about right?
My former colleague, now the late Jim Boffman of our faculty, he calculated, when I retired, he calculated that. He sat and totaled it up, and I think that was somewhere in the 16 to 18,000 range, because I did teach Journalism 201 almost every semester for 30 years. It started out at about 200 a semester, and it ended up at about 550 a semester.
Ooh.
That's a big number, but those were just people who were in a large lecture. But the ones that I really enjoyed the more were teaching a broadcast news lab, teaching an ethics course, where I got to interact more personally with students.
Well, I did find, I went searching through my records. I had 351 with you in 1993.
Okay.
Because I'm picturing myself with Professor Hoyt. Which class was it? So I went rummaging through, and sure enough, I found 351.
Well, I'm glad, because that was the time in the 1990s, from 1990 to 2000, I was chairman of the athletic board, and I was heavily involved in intercollegiate athletics, so I didn't teach quite as many courses. I think I taught 351 only once every 2 years during that time. So you were fortunate. I was fortunate.
One of the lucky ones.
You're
One of the
nice
lucky ones.
during that.
How did that pivot happen to the athletic board? I mean, here you are doing journalism, and then suddenly you're the chair of the athletic board. How did that happen?
Well, you have to ask Donna Shalala, but I can tell you what I think she would tell you if you asked her. I have been working with her since she had become chancellor on a couple other projects. Notably, there was a big issue involving the fraternity sorority system, was getting into all sorts of legal hot water, and she needed to appoint a blue ribbon commission, and she asked me if I would chair that commission, and it actually turned out pretty well. It worked out well, and so I had success on one kind of high profile responsibility with her. And she, remember when in 1990, when the men's hockey team won the NCAA championship, my daughters were hockey fans. We went to Detroit for the national championship game, and I happened to run into her there. And she looked at me and said, "Oh, so are you a hockey fan too?" And I said, we pay some attention to it. Well, it wasn't long after that, I got a call from her. And she said, "Come up, I want to chat with you." And the message was essentially, we're making big changes in the athletic. We fired the football coach, we fired the athletic director. Pat Richter has finally said yes. It took me 3 times to ask him, but he finally said yes. He'd become athletic director. He's just in the process of hiring Barry Alvarez, this assistant coach from Notre Dame, to be the head coach. Now I need to get the faculty on the same page. Would you be up for the job? And I mean, when the chancellor asks you a question like that, you don't say no. You say yes. So I didn't have any idea what I was getting into. The fact that I had not been intimately involved in athletics was a good thing. She wanted somebody who had a perspective, who was strongly enmeshed in the overall campus culture, but understood athletics. And it was a 10-year run. I was both chairman of the athletic board here for that period of time, as well as Carrie mentioned, faculty representative to the NCAA, to the Big Ten Conference, and to the WCHA. So it was significant responsibilities, internal as well as external, all having to do with intercollegiate athletics. So that was Donna, I remember when she was trying to convince me, she thought she was going to have to work harder than she did, but she said something like, "Okay, you're going from broadcast journalism to intercollegiate athletics. Look at it this way. It's kind of like going from the sandbox to the playpen." I'm not quite sure what you're saying, but I think I can handle it.
Had you already been a big sports fan overall growing up? Were you a sports guy or not so much?
Yes, I did. Followed it. I wasn't a big participant other than playing pickup hockey in high school and as an undergraduate here. But not closely involved in it. And that was probably a good thing, because I was able to keep the perspective. And she wanted, Donna Shalala again was always wanting to talk about the academic part of it. The academic, wanted to make sure that the athletes were taking legitimate courses, bona fide courses. They were making progress toward degrees, and that that was going to be a hallmark of the University of Wisconsin. And so she wanted to make sure, and it was not an easy thing to do. I have to say, early on, she was correct. There was a culture on the faculty back in 1990 or 91 that kind of, in a strange sort of way, had the feeling that there was an inverse relationship between the quality of the university and the quality of the athletic teams. That the better the university, the worse the athletic teams. And so if we started to invest more into our athletic program, that means that you're probably going to have to invest less in the academic program, and the university is going to suffer as a result of that. So I got a lot of pushback from faculty on that I had to convince them that you could do both. And she was the one who really carried that message, and I just had to follow up on it. But she would say, the first questions that she would get talking to alumni were, how's the football team doing? Or the football team and the athletic program was the connection between the university and much of the constituency in the state of Wisconsin. And if that was an embarrassment to other people, they were going to be embarrassed about the university also. So you can have both of them. She would use examples of Stanford always had a strong football program, or strong athletic program, as well as a strong academic program. And so that was very important to her. And she also liked the fact that we were doing it largely with Wisconsin, recruiting from Wisconsin, and they could keep the Wisconsin football coaches, the Wisconsin basketball coaches, everyone engaged in it, that it was not, they were going to import an entire program from somewhere else. That was, remember, that was always important. She would always, when she and I would go out and speak around the state or to alumni groups around the country, and I'd get up to talk, and she would kind of poke me in the ribs and say, be sure to tell them you're from Wausau. You know, I want them to know we have local homegrown faculty members who are in charge of this program.
Fun. And Pat Richter's a Madison kid, you know, you had good ties. Like, how long do you think that took before things kind of meshed between, you know, the academic side and the athletic side? Before, I mean, when did you know it was really starting to roll? Obviously, when we won the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, it never did fully, but it got better fairly quickly. And it's hard to not point fingers at the 1993 Rose Bowl game. That was kind of a sea change that kind of converted the people who may not have been believers. Thought, okay, look, we can actually have some significant success as well as maintain the overall academic quality and respect of the university.
Yeah,
I believe I still have a 1993 Rose Bowl hat in my closet downstairs, because since I was there 91 to 95. So, I mean, my husband was there 4 years prior to me, and he's like, you're so lucky that the football team was so much better when you were there versus when I was there. And I hadn't appreciated that change, but I do now.
I do not hesitate to point out that during my 10 years as chairman of the athletic board, Wisconsin went to 3 Rose Bowls, and they won all 3 of them on my watch. And those are the
thank you for your service.
They ever won. Not that I had anything to do.
That is so fun. Yeah. That's
What do you
amazing.
think about, I mean, since you were the rep to the NCAA, and the NCAA has changed so much in recent years, what's your general impression of what's going on there right now?
I'm very, very concerned. And from a whole variety of directions. One, that there really is no organization that has overall responsibility. They've got the Power 5 conferences, you've got the NCAA, you've got all these court rulings saying that you can pay athletes, that they don't have to, they can transfer whatever they want to transfer. And it's all outside. There's no rules, no regulations, no policies surrounding it whatsoever. And in all of these understandable changes, that again, they don't have any choice for them. They come about as a result of court rulings. What gets lost is academics. I mean, somebody, they can play for college A for their freshman year, college B for their sophomore year, college C for their junior year. in College D for their senior year, and they could take a smattering of freshman courses in one, a smattering of freshman courses in the other, or a smattering of freshman, and not end up with any meaningful education as a result of it. And I don't hear that conversation at all. I think anybody told me about that what gets lost in all of that is the education, the long time standard that you have to be making progress toward a degree that you can get within 5 years of matriculation. That's it's by the wayside now. And so I'm concerned. I'm happy to be retired in that regard.
That's the next generation's challenge.
Yeah. You retired, but you still have been extremely active on campus. Some of the things that I understand you're doing is you're involved with the Carbone Cancer Center, the Board of Visitors, or on the Board of Visitors for UW-Madison, and the UW Initiative to End Alzheimer's. Can you tell us about some of those boards that you're on?
Well, I looked around for ways that I could, have some meaningful participation in the campus. I kind of felt like journalism school was doing well. They didn't really, it's been moving on to kind of new types of courses that were beyond me. And I wanted to think of where I could help the university, and the two areas I was most interested in were the Cancer Center. My wife had died of ovarian cancer in 2005, and I had said, I told them at that time, whatever you need from me. And so I was heavily involved for many, many years in fundraising and organizing activities to, raise the profile of gynecologic cancer. And we had a large event every year called Sparkle of Hope to raise funds for gynecologic cancer programs and so on. And it was deep from my heart that I got involved in doing that. And then as I went a little bit further down the road and looked from my 70-year-old, 72, 73-year-old perspective at that time, health issues that were of major concern to me involved Alzheimer's, involved I don't want to be alive and not have an active brain, and I want to see what we can do. And I found out quickly that we have a world-class Alzheimer's research program going on here that's making massive and impressive strides. So I became involved on the Board of Visitors for the Initiative to End Alzheimer's, and it had wonderful successes, gotten massive federal grants for research on Alzheimer's disease. So those have been my two most rewarding ones, along with having some fun playing my tuba now and then.
Well, we're getting to that too, because besides the sports, besides the journalism, you are a tuba player, and you played in the UW marching band, right? When you were a student?
I did. I started playing tuba in junior high school and in high school, and as an undergraduate here at the university, I played at the 1963 Rose Bowl game.
Wow.
When Pat Richter and I would go out and give talks together, he always joked and saying, and I'd like to introduce the chairman of my athletic board. He played in the 1963 Rose Bowl game also. He played tuba.
So were you playing the sousaphone, the big one?
Well, for a marching band, you use a sousaphone. Yes.
Okay.
And then when I retired, or shortly before I retired, and I was looking ahead to what might be of interest to me in retiring, I remember telling the journalism faculty I want to renew a long dormant love affair with playing the tuba. So I started playing. That would have been back in the early 2000s, and joined a number of groups, most significantly a Civil War band called the 1st Brigade Band of Wisconsin. And worked with them for about 22, 23 years, playing my tuba and marching around the country, putting on reenactments of Civil War era programs, and then joined the brass ensemble at our church and played in the VFW band here and played in the Watergate Community Band, and just enjoyed playing tuba. I've given up some of those now. I have to say that in the Civil War band, carrying a tuba and marching for 2 miles wearing a navy blue wool uniform on a 4th of July parade was something I decided I'd let the younger people do. And I decided
I think that's
older
fair.
guys like me, I'd prefer sitting on a stage in an air-conditioned auditorium and entertaining the crowd.
We will
I
not fault
understand
you
that,
for
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Might be a
that's
little
really
gamey
amazing.
after 2 miles with a wool suit on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I finally had to.
That's pretty cool.
I had to give in a little bit to age, though. A couple of years ago, I had to downsize. My tuba weighed 34, 35 pounds, and I was having little troubles lugging it around, and so I downsized, and I found somebody who was interested in buying it, and I bought one that's a little bit smaller that I can manage a little bit better at this point in life. Doesn't sound quite as good.
Well, I was going to say, might be time to take up the piccolo. Then you can just put it in your pocket and go.
In my next life.
I'm just picturing you sitting on your back porch playing the tuba as the sun goes down. That just sounds very nice. You're my new goal. That's kind of, I want to be, you know.
We lived in a condominium up until last year, and I always checked with my neighbor who we shared a wall with and said, you hear me practicing my tuba? And I, oh, no, we don't hear it at all. It's fine. He said, even if I did, I wouldn't mind it.
Is
and,
there a mute thing you can put on there that kind of
no,
sound?
You have to have its full rich tone. Yes.
Let it fly.
Who doesn't love the tuba?
Yeah, that's awesome.
So,
well, we always like to ask some questions before we let you go. Just so we ask them of all of our guests. And my standard question, do you have bloopers from either being on air or working in news or as a professor? Are there things that you said that you still kind of look back and chuckle about or think, oh goodness, how could I have done that?
Oh, that's a good question. I probably suppressed most of them. No, I'm sorry. If I was working in broadcasting most of my life, I probably could come up with, well, okay, I will. Okay, I'll come up with one.
Okay.
I can remember when I was back to my high school days, high school days, working at Channel 7 in Wausau. 1960, the summer, the Democratic National Convention was in Los Angeles. I think you remember that, but John F. Kennedy was nominated in the Los Angeles Coliseum. It was outdoors. And the late newscast, you never knew what time the newscast was going to go on, because whenever they took a break in the convention, they'd go on. The newscast might be at 8 o'clock, might be 9:30. Everybody had to stand by and wait for when the network decided that they were going to break for the news. Well, one of my jobs was to, and I was just working on a studio crew, was to erase all of the weather boards so that they would be prepared for the late newscast. After the early newscast, you'd erase them all, and then they would be redone for the late newscast. Well, I came in after my dinner break, we got an hour break after the early news, and I immediately went to the board and I erased it like I always do. But little did I know, or I didn't know, that the news was going to be much earlier that night, and they had already prepared it for the late newscast. So poor Howard Gurnetsky, who was the weatherman, came out to do the weather, and he ready, on count, cue the weatherman. He looked up at his board, and it was absolutely empty. There was nothing on it whatsoever. And he kind of turned white, and he recovered very well, but we had a nice chat afterward. So for many years afterwards, I remember he would tell that story about the high school kid who worked there who erased my board just before we were going on the air to do the weather.
So would he literally, with like a dry erase marker, be writing what he wanted to show?
Yeah, there were no mechanicals, nothing visual whatsoever. Other he would draw on the board as
sun, rain.
Yep.
I usually ask questions about your jobs through your life, but we've talked a lot about that. So I kind of wanted to, since you have been a mentor to so many people over the years, Professor Hoyt, who do you look back on? Is there one or two people who you look to as they were your mentors?
My mentors. Well, I have to probably begin with Lee Dreyfus, who was the took me by the arm as an undergraduate here and helped me choose my courses and my that career. And I mentioned earlier that my first one of my first memories was my high school debate team watching the 1961 inauguration on the TV's 12-inch black and white TV set, the debate coach that year who pushed us, think, 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 think. Always never think you will know enough. You never know what the other side of the debate team is going to come up with. You need to be prepared. So don't ever be satisfied that you know enough. You've got enough knowledge. Always be curious and continue to learn, continue to learn, continue to learn. So his name was Irv Marquardt. I would give him credit. And I also go back to my high school history teacher, George Johnson, who made us write a paper every week on some element in history. And we would have to use college textbooks as sources. We couldn't use any high school textbooks. And he would give us extra credit. We had to read newspapers. And if we could find a mistake in the newspaper, we would get extra credit. So you read closely and carefully to find an error in the newspaper. And then if you found an error, you wrote a letter to the editor and you pointed out the error. And if your letter got printed, then you got extra credit for getting
What
your
a
letter.
great assignment. That's a
So,
great assignment.
And talk about teaching you to be vigilant, to being careful, and to paying close attention. I would give them credit. And going forward, I would have to, in my college, in college and professional, I would have to go to Jack Krieger was a longtime news director at WTMJ in Milwaukee. I was with Milwaukee. WTMJ was owned by the Journal company, so he was closely integrated with the Journal. And Jack was a UW-Madison journalism alum, and Jack really took me under his wing and kind of gave me direction on how to succeed professionally, as well as totally understanding when I decided I wanted to go back and get an advanced degree rather than do that. So there's some names for you.
Great. Well, you have paid it forward in many, many, many ways. So that's great to hear.
Thousands of times. Yes. Yes.
I've got one final little anecdote that it's such a silly little thing, but always stood out to me. When they, a few years ago, they dedicated a room in my name in Vilas Hall, and some alums wrote little notes about me, kind of like you had show up here. And there was one that was just a very little short note. And what she said was, I always remember you went out of your way to walk across the street to walk with me to class.
Aww.
You saw me walking across the street, and you walked across to walk with me, so I wouldn't be walking alone. How she remembered that at all, and that was something that was meaningful to a student. And I thought, when Katie commented about how you made someone feel, obviously I made her feel that she was appreciated and that she was, and that was, to me, was a very, very, very meaningful response.
That's beautiful. Do you have any advice before we say goodbye today for young journalism students who are thinking of taking journalism classes or going into journalism?
It's a totally different marketplace than I have experienced. So I have a hard time with specific advice. Anybody who wants to be a journalist can be a journalist. All you need is a computer. To find an audience, then that may be a little bit more challenging. But to try to stick to fact-based, interesting storytelling. I like to put it in the context of journalists are storytellers. You want to find a story that resonates with the audience and tell that story. You're not necessarily talking about a action taken by a city council or by any government agency or any speech that was given by anyone. You're telling a story about how that affects someone, how someone reacted to it, what it did to their lives, and so on. And so try to keep in mind the effect of the story that you're telling, and do that. If you think of that, I think you're going to do okay. It may not be in a traditional journalism format. It might be in a podcast like you're doing. It might be in any of a variety of other publications, some of which may be sponsored, some of which may not be. some of which may have commercial interruptions, but you're still needing to tell stories. It's hard for me to get in to give a good evaluation of where we are today. I'm depressed in a way. My view is that the audiences for media are not looking for information as much as they're looking for ammunition. I'm looking for something that will back up what I believe. And I'll keep looking until I can find it. If you're not going to tell me what I believe, I'll go to somebody else and they can tell me what I believe. And I'm hoping that we can break that down by making our stories interesting and compelling and connecting to the audience, that they can recognize that and learn from it, regardless of how they may be aligned with it, socially, politically, religiously, whatever.
We'll talk more with Professor Hoyt about this topic next time on Old News with Dan and Carrie.
That's old news for now.